Good evening. Today we had a few more events happening, and they all more or less relate now to the ongoing conflict in the Ukraine, the war. And I wanted to start tonight with the news which came out of China is that the Chinese defense minister had first visited Kazakhstan and another country next to Kazakhstan before he went to Iran. All of this was done under the umbrella of fighting terrorism, probably Islamic extremists. Interesting that he visited Iran in this sense. And of course, the military cooperation is going to be strengthened now between Iran and China. Weapons, training, and that sort of stuff. That's what they're going to be doing. And this is changing now the whole caliber in this entire situation, what we're having there in the Ukraine. There is some similarities now coming about, which are similar to the time between 1908 and 1914, before World War I started. And the interesting part on this is during that time, Kaiser Wilhelm, the Emperor Wilhelm, was sort of in an arms race, building up his navy to compete primarily with the United Kingdom, with the British Crown, because of the, the colonies and world trade and everything else. And that kind of led to general armament. There was a lot of things moving and going on at this time globally in the colonies, the unrest. We had the uprising in West Africa. The British had problems in their colonies. That winded up almost, or was basically a genocide, what happened there with the native people in West Africa. And so these things all accumulated little by little, and there was more armament, more arming. The French armed, and everyone got into that arms race at the time, which then culminated in 1914. And we're seeing these alliances here now. Back then you had the Boxer war in China. Germany was involved in that point in the late 19th century in China, in these wars over there with the French and whatever else was involved in there. And so back in those days, there was already that kind of turmoil, and it was all directly related to colonization, colonies and colonization. And now we have this issue that we're not really having colonization, but we're having global trade, more or less, as a root cause of this, and alliances. It is usually when these alliances come all about. And the interesting thing is this: back in the monarchies, the European monarchies thought that if they intermarried the European houses, that they could prevent a war. And it is interesting, because what we did in our today's society was we thought through trade and globalization we can avoid wars, and it is turning now out not to be the case. Anyway, so one of these new, not really new, but it has been going on for about 25 years, that China has started to take an active or more active role in Iran during the sanctions. And it looks like that this is going to get cemented now even more. This was going to change the entire dynamics in the Middle East. There's no question about this. and we will see on how the United States and how Europe is going to react to this. The other thing is with this globalization, I will get back to this a little bit later towards the end, because of the Scholz visit to Japan. There's something I wanted to lead into. The other thing is the news which came out of Germany today is that the German Bundestag, the legislature, voted in a more than 2/3 majority to deliver heavy weapons to the Ukraine. So the entire thing is now sanctioned in a democratic fashion, and it is pretty much the supermajority is there. And now Scholz and his people, they have to act on this basically. How good or how bad this is and how the Russian Federation is going to take this, we will have to wait and see on how this is going to play out. This is, again, as I'm going to talk about this towards the end with weapons and ammunition in this global trade thing, because that is not all that easy. So that was basically a done deal. So this is kind of getting the free thing now to get stuff into the Ukrainian theater over there more expedited or expediently. Then the other thing is Rand Paul today was in a hearing, and he attacked the American Foreign Minister, Secretary of State. Blinken is his name. Yeah, I keep forgetting these names. You have to apologize. I usually refer only to the titles of the people because I have a very poor memory with names. There's so many names to remember, and so I hardly can remember them. So that's Blinken, and so they had questioned Blinken, and he basically stated that it was the administration, Joe Biden's administration's fault that Russia invaded the Ukraine, and this was based on the idea, was the principle around it was that if Biden would have not talked about including the Ukraine and NATO, Putin and the Russian Federation wouldn't have had a reason to move in the way they did. That is kind of again one of these apple and banana kind of deals, and the reality in this is this: the Russian Federation has been mingling around there since this maiden revolution, with the annexation of Crimea and the Donbass region. This whole thing has been ongoing, and it was really the starting point in this was really the maiden revolution, and having that pro-Russian leader from the Ukraine they had removed. That's really where it started, because that was the immediate threat. This has been just more escalating, brewing, over the last years, 6-8 years now, since the maiden revolution took place. Rand Paul is a Republican, and he is a libertarian, and a libertarian again is not a liberal, so it has nothing to do with the Democrats. And I'm pretty much a libertarian too, conservative libertarian, and we as libertarians, we believe in a non-interference in other countries, undertaking or dealings what they have. So you remain neutral, basically. You're trying to do self-contained everything. That is for the greater part of your country as a national economy, and you don't depend on any imports or exports to have a striving economy. Then you're pretty much in an ideal spot for that kind of political belief system to function properly. And it is the same thing as we have to look at this. In World War I, the United States did not get involved until very late, and it wasn't until actually the accompanying military Navy ships were attacked by German U-boats that they entered the war. And the same thing was here with World War II, was until actually the Pearl Harbor attacks happened, the United States remained pretty much neutral in the beginning of World War II, but had supported the Soviet Union with vehicles and equipment and that sort of stuff once Operation Barbarossa had started. So they had already, worked against Hitler in a certain way, similar to what we got now. What we're doing here uh, with the Ukraine is what the United States did back then for and with the Soviet Union until the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War at this point. I just wanted to point this out. The issue with Rand Paul is that we have a few Republicans and who are not necessarily against NATO, but they rather would not even in a cause, in an attack to a allied member state, not to get involved in for the United States. And I think there's a general sentiment, more or less, in the Republican voter base, which feels the same way because we're looking at our national debt at $31 trillion. We're looking at our tax money. I'm paying taxes here too in the United States. So this is our tax money. We're looking at that. We're looking at what the Europeans have been doing or the other NATO partners. You had Trump. He said that for quite a few years, beginning in 2016, 2017. He urged the Europeans to get ready for this because we could see that this whole thing was coming. And as you can see now, we will get to that again a little bit later with weapons and ammunition in a little while, that this is not really taking shape. So there is not a great interest here in the United States. There's some interest now to help the Ukraine to the extent we're doing, but to get into a full-blown war on a different, where an attack happens on a different country, that is going to take some time to get this here going from this side. The military is basically ready. The political leaders right now in charge are, but we have an election coming up. And with the upcoming elections, if the Republicans win the House and the Senate, then we may have some greater reluctance in any involvement in any type of military operations within NATO. That is quite possible. I don't know if it's going to happen, but there is a good chance that the United States says we're going to do only a limited thing and let Germany and let France and let England do what they need to do over there, and we're going to do just support stuff. That is very, very likely, and for the Europeans, if they're not completely daydreaming over there, that is something you have to prepare for. The sentiment right now in the general population here, with Joe Biden, the Democrats, and the entire administration, is that it looks like that the Republicans have a very good chance to take control of the House and the Senate in November at the elections. That is a pretty good chance there. If Trump is going to resurface in this or not, we will see. Elon Musk is a very close ally of Trump, and with Elon Musk now being part or owning or soon to own possibly Twitter, it is quite possible that we're going to see more of this right-wing spectrum being back allowed into tweeting, and that would include Trump. Whether he's going to do it or not, we will see. That is the other thing which is coming. Now, with the Scholz's visits today to Japan to meet with the Japanese Prime Minister, was primarily their discussion. They didn't go into detail, but the newspaper didn't. But they discussed the ongoing war. And for the viewer, is Japan has a clause that Japan has to remain a pacifist country in their constitution. So they have no offensive weapons. And now what the Japanese newspapers are writing is that more and more Japanese citizens are getting more and more nervous about not having any offensive weapons and only a limited defense capability over there. And that was the discussion with Scholz, with the ever-growing control of the region by China. And so there's things moving in Japan too. They may abandon their pacifist mandated, constitutionally mandated military form, and they may go to something else. And I think that might be possible, that the Japanese are also interested in buying German weapons and that sort of stuff. That could be quite possible as well. The German newspaper pointed out that the government airplane, the plane Scholz used from the Bundeswehr, was loaded up on the way back with donations from Japan, with diapers and vests and helms and that sort of stuff, helmets for the Ukrainians. So he took that with him in that airplane, because it's a 14-hour flight to Japan. He was 8 hours there and then 14 hours back, basically. So they spent 28 hours in the air. And the interesting thing is, he was the first country he visited in Asia, West Japan, where Merkel went to China first. So you can see there's a difference coming there up on the horizon too. Now, with this pacifist mandate, they don't have the weapons. And the interesting thing is this: across the the Japanese Sea to Korea, the South Koreans, they have weapon deals with the Russians. So the Ukrainian have asked the South Koreans to supply weapons, and they got a problem now that their weapons contain Russian technology. And they did this on purpose. They sucked in the Russians so the North Koreans wouldn't go and work with the Russians. And there's a reason behind this too, because the North Korean intercontinental ballistic missiles, they can go up in the air, but they don't have the technology yet to come down to the spot where they actually need to deploy or, ignite the nuclear device in that area where they need to go to. The re-entry part is missing in their rocket system. And the estimate is from the South Korean experts that it would take only 4 or 5 Russian engineers to give them that technology on that new intercontinental ballistic missile they just featured. And in order to prevent this is why years ago South Korea went to the Russians to get them involved in their weaponry. So this is another thing which came up. So this is how interwoven this is. Now, in this globalization scheme, a lot of the countries have multiple, or these large, corporations have multiple manufacturing locations all across the world. The first problem we're facing with ammunition, now the tanks are built, heavy artillery is built and everything else. This stuff can be shipped to the Ukraine with no problem. Germany can send stuff over, France, England. Almost every country has some form of, heavy weaponry. They can probably accommodate them if you take 50, 60 countries, you're going to have so much weapons that they can't even work with us, because you have basically flooded the country with heavy weapon. The problem in this is the manufacture of the ammunition these heavy equipments and artilleries will need. And a lot of this stuff requires rare earth metals. And the United States has rare earth metals, but they haven't mined it in years because they were buying it from Russia. Russia has one of the largest resources of rare earth metals. There are some deposits in Scandinavia which haven't been fully explored yet. And the only processing facility they have globally to extract these out of the rocks and the stuff, these rare earth metals, is China. So every defense manufacturer who needs rare earth metals. There's a wide variety in them. I can't remember all of them. But for instance, neodymium magnets are rare earth metals. These are very, very strong magnets. And they have to be processed in China because there's nowhere in the Western world or in the United States processing facilities for this because they're extremely energy intense, and no one wanted this with the carbon emissions offset and all of this happy blah blah. That's why they had the Chinese do it. It was the cheapest way, and they went that direction. So now they cannot get any rare earth metals. The main source is Russia, and the processing is done in China. And this is how they were trying to avoid a war. And now the United States and Europe is in a position where they cannot get these metals. And these rare earth metals, besides nickel, for instance, for stainless steel, is used in the high-end steel armament production you need. Iron ore is no problem. Coal is no problem. You got this everywhere. But the ingredients you need to build the armored steel, that is going to be a dance on eggshells. I can tell you that right now. And the other issue they have is, for instance, Rheinmetall, who makes the Marder and I think the Leopard tanks in Germany, but the ammunition for those is built by a company in Switzerland, which is their subsidiary. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that is Burley Oerlikon. I've worked with Burley Oerlikon years ago. They had their main sales office back in the 80s was in Stuttgart, up in Degerloch. And so I knew the president for Burley Oerlikon, Germany. I don't know if that was before Rheinmetall got together with them. I think it was, but now they are part of Rheinmetall. And the Swiss government will not allow the ammunition built in Switzerland to be exported to Germany, because Germany at this point is a partner or a party in a conflict already because of the deliveries of weapons in NATO. So these two vehicles cannot get any ammunition out of their main factory in Switzerland. And Oerlikon was one of the Swiss Oerlikon company was also a builder of infantry or artillery equipment in Switzerland for the Swiss army. So because Switzerland is neutral, they don't allow any type of exports of any military-related stuff to a country which is a participant in a conflict. As simple as that. And Germany fits that profile now. It did fit it because we had sent weapons and ammunition already over there. So with this, so I don't know, for instance, what Rheinmetall thinks on how they're going to supply these large quantities of ammunition they will need to supply the equipment. Can you imagine if they put these Leopard tanks into say like 100 of them into the Ukraine, and you cannot get any ammunition for it? This is the part where the globalization has gone completely astray. And we will see the war may come to an end on our side because of no ammunition. The Russians have the resources. We always have to remember this. And if they crank up their war machine, they might be standing in Berlin pretty soon. They might be going all the way to Paris or to Barcelona or to Africa. Because they can build the tanks, they can build the ammunition. They would have to institute a draft in Russia. They would have to have an awful lot of people involved in this on their end. If the general population is up to this kind of a thing, I don't know. But so this is something the lawmakers in Europe and here in the United States and the defense sector has to think about this, on how they rapidly are going to now turn their machine on to produce the required ammunition for all of this stuff. Sending tanks into battle is one thing. Supplying them with ammunition is something completely different. And we have created a real complicated system here in international and global trade between raw materials, which are very difficult to find, like these rare earth metals, and then having only one processing facility in China to extrapolate the individual components out of the actual granite type, rock, where that is encapsulated in this has to be broken up, and then under tremendous heat it is separated, and then you can separate all the different rare earth materials out of it, metals, out of it. And that is required not just for nuclear bombs or something like this, even for armament and shell casings and bullet heads and that sort of stuff. So we will see. This is another question, is with gunpowder. How many companies in Germany still produce gunpowder? All of the stuff went to the east because no one wanted the environmental issues which come with the production of this stuff. So all of this was exported. We have exported our environmental strenuous processes to China, basically. India to a certain extent, but primarily China. We have exported everything that is dirty. It is health, it's poison, not good for your health hazardous. Any type of, it's dirty, it smells, or whatever it is, it's not good for the environment. All of this was exported to the Chinese. Energy consumption, high energy consumption required for production. All of the stuff went to China. And all of this is critical to the manufacture of these weapons and of the systems altogether. On how they think and how this is going to play out, I don't know. We will see. I went to a meeting in 2009 at the Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. No, this was 2010. For the, which organization was that? That was, the mining organization, yeah. The Miners Association of America, that's right. They had a meeting at Bloomberg headquarters, and I went there. And they had also an event going up in one of the hotels on Times Square. I think it was the Marriott. So I went from Bloomberg then on one day where we had some, discussions in discussion forums. And then I went over to the actual convention kind of thing, what they had there, which was very interesting. And I talked to two mining experts from South Africa and from Australia. And they both pointed this out to me. They said, we got into this discussion about rare earth metals. They said, we don't really have any. Neither South Africa has very, very limited quantities, very difficult to mine. And so does Australia. And he said, we can process this stuff. The United States had a processing facility. I couldn't tell you where it was at. I forgot it. And they had closed it down because of environmental concerns. They did that already in the 1990s when Bill Clinton was president. And so that was systematically done over a long period of time. We have gotten into this dependency. And I do not know on how the Western world is going to counteract this, since we know now that by moving these critical manufacturing processes for our defense into another country, which is not our best friend, in this case we have two, Russia and China, has put us into a position where we have to come up very, very quickly with a substitute or an alternative for this. And I do not know on how fast our esteemed elected officials and the people in the defense sector and manufacturing sector in general, the corporate people, are going to be able to respond to this without being manhandled by the legislatures. Here in the United States, we have a law in the book which any president can enact. That's the National Defense Act, and you're ordered then to produce something, and this can happen. But the problem with this is it usually takes time because the infrastructure is not there, the manufacturing equipment is not there. So they have to basically set this all up, and until this all goes, there could be a year, there could be 2 years, there could be 3 years. It could go a little bit faster. But we will have a definite delay, and that's where China, India, and Russia have strategic advantages in this. This is something we have to really rethink in the West, on how capable our current elected officials in Europe and here in the United States are to fully comprehend and understand this. I'm not sure about it. We will see, and we will see what the next election is going to bring. I do not know. I'm still trying to get this video done with the Order of the Black Eagle, but then this came up today, and I think this is right now more important to talk about. And I'm trying to pass information on to you as the viewer, which is not readily or easily available on the internet, and you sure won't find anything what I'm talking about on TikTok or on Instagram. This is more what I talk about here is for someone who wants to be informed without any hype, down to the point and as objective as possible. Just as much as the fact and as much verification as I can do on them, is I want to make sure that this what I present and talk about here today is correct. That's why I usually check multiple sources globally to see on how each side is reporting on this. And then a lot of times when we read international, newspapers or news, you have to sometimes read in between the lines, and then the question is what they're saying, and then what's more important is what they're not saying. And then you can get a picture out of this, of what actually is going on. This is to be informed, and I believe that my viewers are, since I don't have that many at this point, are basically the not average news consumer of what we're getting. I don't want to get into this with fake news. You can watch news. You just have to know properly on how to debunk this to see what is true and what is not true. It is almost like in any of these scenarios, it is like a marriage. And there's always 3 sides to the story: his, hers, and the truth. And this is sort of what we got here. One side is saying it this way, the other side is saying it that way. You compare both sides and you will find out what most likely the truth is in it. So the Black Order, the Order of the Black Eagle, I'm still going to get this going here hopefully sooner than later. Depends on the day's events and what we have going on. And otherwise, I would like to thank you again for watching this video and for subscribing, for those of you who have subscribed. And I hope that the content presented to you is informative for you, and it can benefit you in several ways, making financial decisions or whatever decisions you may have to make in your life or in your business. That is the primary objective here. And with that, you have a great evening.